You're Tim Hunter. You want to give a little bit of explanation of who you are, sort of where you've come out of?
Yeah, my name's Tim Hunter. I did not grow up in Florida.
Oh, I
I
didn't
did not
realize
grow
that.
up in the Panhandle. Yeah, I grew up in New Hampshire.
Wow.
So born and raised in New England. Spent some time in Massachusetts as well. I've got family in Rhode Island. So about an hour south of Boston is the best way I know to kind of explain where I grew up.
Okay.
Came here for school at Pensacola Christian College, and then
Mhm.
I ended up staying for ministry at Olive Baptist. So now I serve for the past 18 months or so. I've been serving as the college and young adults minister.
And did you started at Olive? Or you were sort of interning and helping and doing like
Yeah.
you've always been on staff at least the college guy, right?
So I was on staff as intern resident, and then I did like 8 months of a kind of a made up position called director of spiritual formation. Basically,
Sure.
I mean, we were doing real. It was like a real staff position, full time and all that. But it was much more like, um, kind of just trying to help out with discipleship and evangelism.
Yeah.
Summary. So.
That just reminds me of the old joke because you know Ryan Kirkland, obviously,
Hmm.
is a guy over at Olive, and we always joked that as big as Olive was and with as many doors and different places, like when they had all the nameplates out,
Right.
you could probably just put one up and make yourself a little office and just
Right.
call it like director of directors or something.
Yeah,
And just,
exactly. Yeah.
nobody will know.
Yeah, when you throw the director in front of it, it's like, who knows. So,
Is this somebody's office? I don't
yeah.
know. Who knows?
But I was involved with, so I interned in the college ministry that's how I first kind of,
Under Ethan, I'm assuming.
really under John Huff. So
Okay.
when I came, John Huff had just taken over Crossroads. He spent about 2 years in that position, and then Ethan spent 2 years as well. So I really get to learn under each of them, and was kind of their, maybe right-hand man,
Yeah.
being trained up under each. So by the time I started leading it, I'd gotten a front row seat for 4-ish years of
Okay.
kind of behind the scenes of like how to do college ministry and stuff. So I feel like I got a little bit of a head start in that way.
Sure. Yeah. Like you sort of had a grounding in the ministry where you didn't have a way to fail, really. Like you were. Sort
Yeah,
of there.
I knew so many of the students, the leaders, so
Yeah.
I had relationships. And my wife Andrea for a time worked as Ethan's assistant
Yeah.
for a couple of years, and then she also was on the worship team for the
Well,
college
She's in
ministry.
Mendoza. So
Yeah, exactly.
She's on
So-
the worship team somewhere.
Right, exactly. So it's just so there's just a lot of tie-ins to Olive, specifically Crossroads ministry there. So
Okay. So I really kind of wanted to talk to you about the college ministry stuff because just sort of in the setting of where we are now, obviously this is going to be released later,
Mhm.
probably more like in the June sort of time frame once I get
Yeah.
everything kind of batched together. But the Crossroads is really blowing up right now, man.
Yeah.
And it's exploding. And I think that's on the back of sort of a lot of things.
Mhm.
I had Jack over at our church around the time, in fact, the weekend of, I think, the Asbury revival
Yeah,
was
yeah,
going on.
yep.
And that's sort of like almost the starting point. I'm sure there were things before that, but that's sort of where people's mind go, where like
Mhm.
it seems like there's a revival sort of in the college ministries
Right.
around the country going
Right.
on. So what is that like? Where do you think that started? What is that looking like, and sort of how does that play into what you're doing?
Yeah. I'll kind of answer that in a few ways because I think what you did is you mentioned something kind of, I don't know if I'd say global, but at least national. What I think we're seeing among kind of the young adult, college aged,
Mhm.
loosely really Gen Z generation. It does seem like, at least in my limited exposure and at least watching, it does seem like God's stirring up something
Yeah.
on college campuses among Gen Z. And I wonder if a lot of it comes on the back of COVID.
Okay, yeah.
Some time spent in isolation and kind of sifting out. That's a formative experience for a 19 or 20-year-old to be, 15, 16, 17
Oh yeah.
when a worldwide pandemic. And I wonder if there seems to be a greater level of seriousness among that generation and a hunger for kind of depth and authentic scriptural teaching and real encounter with God. They don't have much of an appetite for just kind of maybe what we would have termed just attractional back in the day.
Sure,
It feels very much if they're gonna be here, they want to be here. So I think we're seeing that, and then locally, the way that I answer is just, man, what's happened with Crossroads right now is I think the way I describe it is we stand on answered prayers and shoulders. So there's just been a lot of prayer, specifically with our pastor leading our church with this vision for 10 plus years really about college ministry, and in Crossroads specifically, just a lot of prayer. He's prayed. He's been kind of relentless and praying for specifically University of West Florida, which would be, we draw from a lot of different sources, but University of West Florida would be the primary college demographic. And so I'm quick to kind of give credit to prayer, because I think a lot of times,
which we all should be.
Yeah. I think a lot of times we pray for things and then we don't ever take stock when they are answered, if that makes sense. We're just, so we're like, well, this happened, or we have this location, or, this speaker, or this worship band was good. And God's going to use all those things. Yeah. But I do really think just a lot of prayer has been happening. I remember when I was a college student intern, would do prayer walks on the campus where, so there's just been prayer for years sown. And then the other factor I think is, young adults are taking ownership of their faith. So they are the ones growing the ministry. They're the ones on the campus sharing the gospel. They're the ones discipling their work buddies. There's one young man who came to faith recently, baptized. He works at Publix, right? He was, he's a college student. I think he's 20 years old or something. And just a coworker who's one of our, volunteer leaders, just kind of pestered him. You got to come with me. You got to come with me.
Right.
And he came, and he had some background of faith, but he really gave his life to Christ, what he felt like was the first time, and it's just been growing, exponentially now. And that story's just been replicated over and over and over again. So
when I know you've been doing some things that just kind of get vague information off of Facebook and what's going around. I think you're calling it Jesus Talks or God Talks or something in that realm. So do you think like taking a piece of that where like maybe you're being more intentional with, it's not just we're gathering together to worship, which is great.
Yes.
But that we're actually, it's great to be here, but you got to be out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. In 2023 we did a goal of we wanted to have 500 what we call Jesus Talks, and we kept it simple. Because what I didn't want to do is I didn't want to have so much language about living on mission that you kind of get lost in the sauce and you never actually go talk to someone about Jesus. Right. So the goal was simple. Please just go talk to people who are either, the way we defined it, far from Jesus or don't know Jesus. So, you got someone who may have a knowledge of Jesus, right, but they're not living as a follower of him, or someone who just does not know Christ. Talk to them about Jesus, and there's different training models you can use. But I'm convinced that most believers who are sitting in church, if we're doing our job, they should be able to talk about Jesus.
Yeah, on a basic
he's the
level.
gospel. Yeah. And we want to catalyze that. And not every conversation was perfect, but we hit the 500. And I think what it did is it helped shift a mentality there. Most believers know we should share the gospel. Most believers just never do. I mean, that as a pastor. So that was 2023, and then 2024 we're now doing one called Your One Jesus Talks. So the goal now is it's a little bit like, okay, we kind of shifted the gear to kind of like just throw some missional voltage into our group. That was kind of the goal. And we saw people come to faith in Christ and baptized, and but most of the time, right, they're having these talks and you don't see immediate fruit. It's just seeds. So now that next step is like, okay, let's really lean in after we've sown seeds on Your One. Again, most people hear that we're supposed to go reach the world, but they don't even have one person that they're burdened for praying and trying to reach. So the goal this year is let's see if we can have 200 young adults commit to a one.
So I think there's two things in what you said that are fascinating to me, because I think they're right and we don't think about them enough, right? That one, you've got the initial, right, we're going to have these Jesus Talks, which is sort of the sower and the seed model, right?
Yes.
We taught that at our church 6 months ago, a year ago now at this point. We were going through the parables, and that's one of the big things people misunderstand about sort of sowing the seeds. It's not like it's directional. Like if you've never done that job, the whole point is I'm just going to take what I have in my bag, which is the message of the gospel,
right,
and I'm throwing it out to as far as I can get it, as wide as I can get it, whoever I can get it to.
Yes.
And God's going to do the work on the other side, right? He's going to find out which land it plants on. Those people are going to accept or not accept. None of that's on me. I'm just called to sow.
Yes.
And then going beyond that to what you said about the idea of like actually finding somebody and sharing the gospel with them, because plenty of us, and in some ways I blame my generation for it. So I'm a millennial. I think you're Gen Z or
I'm the very weird, like I was born in 1998, so I'm 25, so kind of depending on how you chart it, I think I'm technically
probably technically you're Gen Z, but very early.
Yes.
Yeah, very early Gen Z.
But I know there's some different, ways you break
people
it
track
down.
it different ways and where they're going to put it.
But I'll take the Gen Z label.
Sure.
You know?
Well, I think so. Obviously, I'd rather be a Gen Z because millennials get a lot of blame for a lot of things, and rightly so. Like, I'm not saying that's unfair.
Yeah, I still think some people group millennials and Gen Z together. Like,
sure, yeah.
When they talk about young people, I think sometimes they're thinking of some tendencies of millennials, but I think Gen Z is very different. We can get into that later, but I digress.
Millennial for me, like, that was all of the millennials now are in our 30s. Like,
right.
That's where we're at.
Mm-hmm.
But I get to, like, our problem was, and I think this is a problem that I've seen be solved a lot in Gen Z. I'm not saying it's gone away entirely, so there's always a remnant of it, but our people wanted to get so wrapped up, and I was caught in this, of like debating theology.
Yes.
And we got lost in theology and never actually spread the gospel.
Yes.
Like, we got so lost in Calvinism, we got so lost in, name your theology, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And we like, man, we're going to talk about this, and that's what we need to be. And we were talking with that to people who didn't even know who Jesus was yet.
Right.
And so we just didn't see much fruit come out of it because we really weren't spreading the gospel. We were spreading something else.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that sort of changing with sort of y'all's model that's going on there.
Yeah, I think, there's always pendulum swings. So,
Yes.
because then you swing away and then we're never going to teach people theology. And as you and I both know, theology is the bedrock of which mission has to flow from.
Yeah.
But I do think, and I'm not someone who views discipling people into truth, through things like theology and evangelizing the lost at odds with each other. And I think this is a big thing when it comes to college young ministry. I think, you look at the Great Commission, Jesus calls us to make disciples. Yep. He doesn't technically tell us to evangelize, or he doesn't technically tell us to just be about discipleship. Yep. Like, as if he tells us to make disciples by going. And this, you're familiar with whether there's a singular verb there to make disciples, and then there's participles that, explain it. By going, to me, that's the, evangelism aspect, or just preaching the gospel, to be more precise with what the New Testament would call it, preaching the gospel. And then you baptize, you immerse them into the community of faith, and then you teach them all that I've commanded them to do. You teach them how to obey, which traditionally would be known as that discipleship aspect. But I find it very helpful to kind of frame it all as, hey, we're about making disciples. And that way, what can tend to happen is if you separate it all out, people end up either being all about what you talked about. They only want to talk about the teach people to obey aspect, which, side note, it's usually teach them facts, not how to obey. But that's just a different.
That's a separate issue.
Yeah. That could be a different. But I found, like, hey, if we can just, whether I'm preaching on our Tuesday night gathering, or whether we're doing our small groups, or whether we're doing discipleship groups, or whether we're on campus evangelizing, having these Jesus talks, to me, if the goal is always to make a disciple, that's a mission that Gen Z can get behind.
Yeah.
Like, informing these lifelong followers of Jesus Christ. Because just in that, we're keeping him at the center.
Yeah.
It has immediate life application, because to be a disciple is someone who follows in the path of their rabbi. And I think what can happen is, when it comes to, like, what you said, evangelists can get a really bad rap among Gen Z, because no one likes to go try to convince other people about different, didactic truths. It feels very much strange to go up to a stranger and be like, what are your thoughts on the afterlife? And how do you, that's really what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But there is something to go, like, man, I'm a follower of Christ. I believe in him. I believe he's the meaning to purpose. I believe he's the one who has saved me, forgiven me, healed me, so on and so forth. Can I invite you into that? And a lot of that is like to me, wedding this concept of discipleship and evangelism into let's make disciples.
Well, you said it earlier.
Because we don't want a pendulum swing either way.
Yeah, that's what like I said. You just said that, and that's been a big portion of my life. Like I talk about in the church a lot, actually, is the idea of this pendulum swing. So many things we have are pendulum problems.
Yes.
That we swing so far to one, then we realize there's a problem, and we swing all the way back to the other side.
Mm-hmm.
I kid about that. Evangelism and discipleship are hugely that way.
Yeah.
We realize we're not having new people come, so we go to disciple or we go to evangelism, and then we realize, well, these people aren't that deep, and we swing all the way back to discipleship, and we never just somebody never just grab it in the middle and go, okay, we need to be doing both these things.
Yes. And they're both the same goal. That's yes. What I think. Like, everything is about, in the Great Commission, making disciples of Jesus Christ. And then even if you think about Acts chapter 1:8, I love the language that Jesus uses there. You know, because you've got the Mark 16:15, go preach the gospel. Yeah. You've got the ending of Matthew, which is the one that we most commonly use, the Great Commission, Matthew 28. You've got John, which I think is a really underrated one, John 20:21. As the Father has sent me, so send I you. I love the simplicity of this.
Yeah, beautiful, simple.
The one in Luke is, I'm drawing a blank on how he words it there, but I don't know if Luke has the same sending off, if I remember off the top of my head. But Acts 1:8, then you could say is like the fourth rendering of the Great Commission, when Jesus says, "You'll go after you receive power from the Holy Spirit, you'll be my witnesses." And then he does the classic Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth,
which should always be mentioned that people misunderstand that verse because they see it as at least my generation started teaching that as almost like a pathway. Like you start here, then you go there, then you go there.
Yes.
Which is not how it's actually intended.
After you get the Holy Spirit is the day you get saved.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Then usually like they start in your own local area, then go like, but no, it means everywhere. We should be hitting everywhere as much as we can.
Exactly. Yeah. And but I love the language in Acts 1:8 because it says, "You'll be my witnesses," and there's something about bearing witness to Jesus Christ that I think we need to regain if we want to see Gen Z specifically live on mission.
Okay.
This language of kind of making disciples, preaching the gospel, bearing witness, to me are all slightly more precise when it comes to teaching evangelism. Because evangelism is not a word found in the New Testament.
Right. Yeah.
Both you and I know it's a helpful term to describe. There's many things that aren't said that, but I do think when, for example, with the Jesus Talk thing, I wasn't going to go, hey guys, we want to go do, to everybody, we want you to go evangelize.
Right.
I was like, well, can you go talk about Jesus? Because he says you'll be my witnesses, and to bear witness of something is to tell someone else about something you've experienced.
Yeah.
So even in the language of just trying to be like, hey, you might have been really scared by the word evangelism.
Yeah.
Okay, let's scrap that. Let's use talking about,
Sure, no, absolutely. Language doesn't matter as much as the action we're taking.
Right, and I think so many times you can get lost in like the church words, and the end goal is like, man, we want people to be out there talking to their friends about Jesus Christ. And I'm convinced if people who can bear witness to what Christ has done in their life can go tell other people.
Yeah.
And then our job is, while we have the people in the room, let's give them good, rich teachings in Scripture. And I'm convinced that the overflow of that in evangelism will be really natural.
Yeah. And you're talking about from a pastoral standpoint. Like
yes.
We talk deep. We disciple, if you want to call it that way.
Yeah.
You want to split the two. And then we send people out to evangelize. Although all of that is making disciples. And sort of.
Yes, yeah. And I've got another thing about Gen Z when it comes to this is, even with preaching, teaching, I think there's another false dichotomy has been this dichotomy between like deep and shallow teaching.
Sure.
What Gen Z really longs for is deep teaching with hands-on life practice application. Those don't have to be two different things, And I'm sure you've seen that you've either got a 15-minute like just pep talk,
sure, yeah,
or someone who's only parsing Greek verbs, and really they just want you to teach them a no-nonsense from the Bible what it says, and then what does this mean for my life, Yeah,
I've found in my own life that like regardless of what generation it is, we've got a few Gen Zers in the church, and we've got a lot of sort of boomers and sort of a little bit mixed in between. And I've found, just as I've gone forward with a lot of different generations, that no matter who you're talking to, what they're really seeking is authenticity in the word. And there's a lot of pastors out there, and I don't want to throw shade on anybody because I think everybody's striving to do their best for the most part. But you got a lot who are, like I said, they're parsing Greek and they're laying this out. Let's look at all the detail of this word. We're spending all week on one, verse in the Bible, and we're never getting out of it. And that's beautiful. Like, I love to listen to that to some degree. But people walk out of that. Have I learned anything? Is there any challenge going out of this? And then you got the other side, which is the pep talk side, which is, hey, rah, rah, we're all going to go good. We're going to be out there in the world. Everything's going great. and you sort of leave without a challenge of any kind. Like,
yes,
I'm just already good enough. I don't need to change anything.
Right.
And
that's not really how Jesus taught, obviously, or
Sure.
really apostles taught. I think there's always a clear challenge to obey the word, right? And it's all over, the Sermon on the Mount, the best sermon that's ever been preached, ends with, he who puts these into practice is the man, who. But I think of preaching to Gen Z a little bit like CrossFit.
Okay. I don't do CrossFit. You're going to have to explain
I don't do CrossFit either. But here's the thing. What do you know about CrossFit?
I know that the people who do CrossFit won't shut up about CrossFit.
Yeah, that's good. Well, and the other thing is, that's one, there's this,
CrossFit
I think,
and vegans, those two things.
I think that when I think about CrossFit, I think we all have a respect, even if we despise so much to talk about, to how committed they are to training and these things.
Yeah.
So to me, from what I can tell, I've had some friends who do CrossFit, and as I've Q&A'd with them about it, if you're someone who's in great shape, you're challenged by CrossFit. If you're someone who is not in great shape, but you're just trying to get exercise, there's actually a pathway there for you to be a beginner and be challenged. And then if you're the person who doesn't work out at all, there's something compelling about CrossFit.
Yeah.
Kind of, wow, those people take this really seriously. And I think what can happen, and I think Gen Z has started to be able to sniff this out, when trying to reach younger generation turns into some type of marketing scheme, what happens is it can come off, and I've had a Planet Fitness membership before, so no shade, but just this is the illustration. It can come off a little bit like a Planet Fitness. Hey, we've made this as easy as possible for you. The price is as low as possible. There won't be that many crazy committed people in here who are going to scream and yell and drop their weights. We've made this to kind of fit just the middle, if that makes sense. Well, which is great if you want to have a gym membership for, as I've had before, no shame on that, like, what is it, $70 a month? But I think when it comes to Gen Z, they're looking for something real. Yeah. And what I say is, man, when we communicate with Gen Z, let's give them a high view of Scripture and discipleship and Jesus's honestly demands on our life for how to live, and call them into obedience and holiness. Because what's going to happen is those, and we all know these young adults in our church who are the committed ones, they're going to see that and they're not going to get bored. Yeah, they're going to continue to be challenged to take the next step and be turned into leaders. Those kind of newer believers, or those who have been saved but have not made much progress in their faith, are going to be challenged. Yeah. Because you're going to go, oh, that's what discipleship looks like. And I'm convinced more and more the unbelievers who come in, to use the language of 1 Corinthians, I think, 14, are going to stand in awe. Right? The same way that we look at those people who do CrossFit, we don't know why they're that excited about that, but they're really into it. Yeah. And I've kind of used this CrossFit imagery almost when I think through preaching, communicating, and teaching the Bible, because it's I don't think strong, challenging teaching has to be mutually exclusive with challenging people to go live it out. I think there's a way, much like you can challenge people with Scripture and rich teaching, but if it's tied to life application, I think it'll be a lot like CrossFit. It's going to get a lot of people who are spiritually not very in great shape to be challenged to take the next step. Those who are in great shape spiritually are going to go, man, they're actually speaking to me and giving me next steps. And then those who are like, man, I don't even exercise. I don't know what it is. I don't know who Jesus is. I think they're going to look at that and go, oh, those college students on my campus, what is going on? They're praying. They're worshiping. They won't stop telling me. This is the 5th time one of them's told me about Jesus, And I think we do ourselves a disservice when we go, hey, we want to reach young people. Let's lower everything down to the lowest common denominator.
Look, there's a pastor named Greg Pinkner. I don't know if you ever heard of him.
I haven't. No.
He's out of Tennessee. He's been in a church called Crossroads Church. Was a college pastor for a long time. Now I think he's the head pastor of the church out there. And one of the first times I heard him, he was talking about just how he ministered, and he was doing college students at the time. And that was back when millennials were the one in college. And he made the joke then. He said, a lot of people will tell you need to dumb down so the gospel. Dumb down is maybe not the right term, that you need to kind of bring the gospel down to these students' level. And he was always a big fan. He said, look, we don't bring the gospel down to anyone's level. We teach the gospel where it's at, and we bring people up to that level. So We provide options, we provide opportunity, we provide a way for somebody to look
Right.
at it and go, that's what we're called to, and we're going to go that route.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and as you said that, there is one thing I want to add too. There's also like, we got to remember, every illustration breaks down.
Absolutely.
So the way that we call people up, in CrossFit, maybe some trainer yelling at you. Through the gospel, it's grace.
That's right.
So that's the part we've got to remember, because again, it's not just we want to challenge them for the sake of challenging. No, we challenge them, but the way that we call them up into this high vision is not through their morality or it's ultimately through the grace of the Holy Spirit inside them and the grace of the gospel. So as long as we keep that, I think we can call people up into like, because to me, calling people into serious discipleship points to serious grace.
Yeah.
Right? If it's like, man, they're challenging me to like give stuff up and live all of it and go tell my friends and risk, shame and and they're giving me opportunities to hop on a plane and go experience, something over, all these things that step people outside their comfort zone. What it doesn't do is it doesn't make you go, oh, that grace, but it goes, man, those people have experienced the grace of God, right? Because it's when we don't call people up in anything, I think we diminish the grace of God.
Absolutely.
Because not doing anything and not living with purpose and mission and vitality and courage, you can do all those things without the grace of God. That's just going to be our default. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I do think, like, again, with that, the pendulum swing is like, we want to like meet young adults with the grace of Jesus.
Yeah.
But I think their eyes will be open more and more to the grace as they see fully devoted followers of Jesus Christ living on mission.
Oh, yeah. But we used to tell, it was a big point of that what we call people to and what we expect of people matters.
Mm-hmm.
So we used to talk about like youth when I was doing youth ministry for a long while, that was like a big deal, that you have so many leaders who would be like, well, they can't read the Bible, they can't do this, they're just 15, they're just 12, they're just 13, whatever it is. And I made the point over and over again, and the psychology proves this out, the Bible speaks to it, like, people raise themselves up to the expectations set for them.
Yes.
That's why Christ expects so much of us. Are we going to hit perfection? No. Is every student going to hit what you put their target at? Of course not.
Right.
But saying that just because you didn't hit this target, we're going to lower the target, means that now I'm still probably not going to hit the target you set, but my miss is going to be even lower than it would have been had I put the target where it should be.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. I think, and, we want to, and there's a progression.
Absolutely.
So if we're trying to teach students to read the Bible, we probably don't need to, the first time someone's trying to read the Bible is give them, I'm going through a chronological 365 days, so I spent, a couple weeks in Numbers, give them a step.
Sure.
Hey, can you read a chapter a day? Can you, but there's a step and a progression, because that's what discipleship is. It's learning and apprenticing. And the other thing to remember is I think there's power to invitation. And this in pastoral ministry, we don't demand, we invite.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of the day, like, we invite them into this vision of living for Jesus. Yeah. But we can't twist anyone's arms behind their back, No. But there is power to framing it as an invitation, because when you invite someone into something, you're excited about it. Mm-hmm. And it's not so much, guys, why don't you do this? It's, man, we want to invite you into abundant life in Jesus Christ. We want to invite, and then we do have to wrestle with, not everybody's going to take that invitation. And that's just always been true.
And look, that's I think the biggest thing that keeps a lot of people out, from my experience at least, when I'm talking to people about, hey, why don't we go share the gospel? Why don't we go out here and talk about Jesus? The biggest things you'll hear back are, well, I've done that before and I didn't really see anything out of it. Or, I don't know what to say. I'm afraid of messing it up.
Yes.
Which, of course, we both know, unless you're preaching Satan, you're not going to mess it up, because God will work through you.
Yeah.
Like, there's certain things that people just get fearful of, and that fear puts you into a place where you're just not going to do anything.
Right.
Not even try to go out and do anything else.
Well, and I think, too, to circle back to, this all starting, we started talking about the Jesus talk, like you said, you mess up sales presentations.
Sure.
It's hard to mess up when you're bearing witness to a person.
Yeah, you're just having a conversation about it.
Yeah, it's like, if you know your wife well, you know what I mean? Like, if you're in this relationship with your wife, you're going to have an understanding of who she is, what she's like, and when you're trying to tell someone else about her. Now, of course, your wife is not your Lord and Savior and King of the universe. I understand all that. But there is this aspect of when you're a disciple of Jesus, right? You think about those 12 disciples. Mm-hmm. They were with Jesus, so they knew him well, and they're able to share that freely. Mm-hmm. I think some people get so into, like, how do I present it? And we need to teach people how to present it in clear, simple ways. Yeah. But as you know, when you have conversations with real people, and I'm on, University of West Florida just about every week, I try to be there at least once, sharing the gospel with real-life college students. So that's another thing. Sometimes we keep talking about a generation, and we're not having, that's a big thing I would just say is one of my pet peeves about college ministries. There's all these theories, but it's like, just put in reps of speaking to college students. And, like, one thing you realize is they're hungry for real conversations about real things. Mm-hmm. What they're probably not hungry for is packaged sales presentations, because they get those all the time. Yeah. I mean, this is a generation that grew up on ads. Targeted Instagrams. Ads, yeah. Not just regular ads. Yeah. I mean, I'm not even old at all by any stretch of imagination, and you aren't either. But even in our short lifetimes, we've seen the way that sales presentations have become more and more precise, and so
I'm older than Google, so
yeah, I don't even know how long has Google been around.
Google was 1991, I believe. So
I'm not older than Google.
I'm not much older than Google, but I am older than Google, which is, it feels weird.
I'm younger than Google.
Yeah, there you go.
Man, yeah. So I do think there is, like you said, authenticity. That word gets thrown a lot, but there is something to, like, someone just authentically sharing about Jesus Christ.
Well, it's weird you say it. So authenticity is a word that I think gets put into a sales package.
Yes.
That is what a lot of, I think we're talking about Gen Z and the different generations, but I think ultimately that's what every generation wants, right?
Yes.
I found
my
older crowd right now, we won't go all the way into it, but we're doing a Bible study on Wednesday mornings. Mm-hmm. That has been great, because I decided when we started it, I'm just going to talk to them like I used to talk to students back in the day. We're going to read through it. We're just going to talk about what is actually in the passage. And we're just going to enjoy that conversation. And, man, it's been blowing up, which has been great.
Wow, that's cool.
Because it's generationally, they want authenticity. But so often, authenticity has gotten moved into something we add to the package of our sales pitch.
That's a good word, yeah.
We're so much, we're this, and we're authentic. Here, buy our thing.
Yes.
And that's not what authenticity is. It's not how you get somebody with authenticity. You just have to be you.
That's a great word, actually. I'm gonna chew on that one for a little bit, because that's, pretty much everybody knows by now, to reach any sort of younger generations, you need to be authentic. So everybody knows to market that they're authentic.
Yes.
So I'll need to actually do some thinking through, just.
Well, in some ways, it's the whole Etsy thing now, right? So at some point, we realized people want sort of like homemade, authentic, sort of whatever thing it is now. And now you'll find everywhere mass-produced, authentically made. Yeah, I think we've done the same thing with authenticity in the church in a lot of ways. Or a lot of ministries have that. We've put that in our branding, and we've gone forward. We haven't really taken into account what that means.
That's a good word. I'm going to seriously think on that a little bit, because authenticity can't, but to me, it's the same thing as, like, the whole, like, how is someone cool?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
The second that you're only trying to be cool, you're no longer cool.
That's right.
And that is hard, because we do want to be intentional about being authentic, but I do think even authentic, like, again, a lot of this comes back to when people talk about, like, college students and young adults and Gen Z and, up those high schoolers is, and I can't really speak on the younger generations, because I don't know how much.
Yeah, we don't know where the split's going to be and how it'll change. But,
right, that would be Gen Alpha, and
is that there's the name for it now?
Yeah.
But I wasn't sure.
So I don't know when they're, but at least, like, upper high school, college, and then into those, later years of the 20s. I think they're, like, the biggest thing is they just want the real thing.
Yeah. Well, they want you to own it in some ways, is what just having done youth sort of in the Gen Z area. Because all my youth are either now in college, so I've got some that are in places in the college ministries, or I've got some that are, like, just getting married and having kids.
Right.
What I always found was I met so many youth pastors, and again, it's no shade. Everybody's trying to do their best when they're trying to do it, for the most part. But you'd find so many youth pastors who are like, well, I have to be interested in this because they're interested in it, or I need to be interested in games, or I need to be interested in sports, or I need to be interested in this. And I'll just be honest with you. You've seen me. You know who I am. I'm not a sports guy. Like, that's not me. I went to sports when I was a youth pastor, and I led through those things. But what I found is if I was just authentic in the idea that, look, I'm not going to pretend like I know how to play football or like I can get out here. Like, all right, guys, we're going to. Yeah. Like, that's not me, even though that was my youth demographic that I had. Instead, what I learned is if I just authentic and sit here and ask the questions that maybe are going to make me look like an idiot, but that person really wants to talk about it, then we can dive into that. Man, let me tell you about this. I don't know anything about that. Can you explain it to me? Hunting's the same way for me. Where you're hunters, you're like, man, tell me what you did. What is that kind of right? Like, people get interested in that conversation, and that leads you then into the same thing. If you've been authentic there, now when you move on to say, hey, let me talk to you about Jesus, then they know that you're not just sort of putting a front on for them.
Yes.
That you're going to be authentic when you don't know something, and you're going to be genuine when it matters.
That's a great word. Yeah, I did some. So read a lot of Barna research, did some other Lifeway research, and then I did a lot of just anecdotal research. Like I remember I sat in a room with about 12 to 15 seniors in high school. So this was last year. So these guys are all college students now, and or most of them are. Some of them might have been juniors, but you get the idea. Yeah. All 17, 18, 19 years old. And it was like, man, what do you look for in a leader? Because I'm going, man, how do you, like, you can get so lost in, like, what does leadership look like? What does pastoral leader, this is a complex generation. They're addicted to their phones. The depression, anxiety is through the roof. You're like, and the way that I would summarize it, there was longer explanations. But basically it came down to relational leadership and challenging teaching. Was honestly what they basically were like. I just want the kind of leader who, when I show up, would look me in the eyes and look like they actually care that I'm there. Yeah. Which I was like, oh wow. So you don't have to be. They weren't looking for any one sort of, the super trendy cool leader, the uber masculine, the super touchy feely. It was just like, man, just someone who like you kind of said, presence, like is kind of like. Personable, not far off from the people. And then the other aspect was like, and I sense this a lot because they're inundated with content. Yeah. If you're gonna get up and teach, and we're gonna sit there and listen to you, please think it through and make it worth my while. I mean that's basically. Don't waste my time. Yeah. So for me that was almost like super like when it comes to authenticity, I'm like, okay, I can do those things. Like I can now with certain growth things, I can't know. Sadly right now, even close to everybody's name. Yeah. But what I can do is, when God gives me opportunity to, whether it's at the front door, whether it's after, the service preaching, whether it's over coffee, after I leave here, I get coffee with a guy, man, I can be relational. I can be me. I can care about them, right? Yeah. That can come through my teaching as well. And then when it's my turn to open the Bible and teach them, whether that's on a stage with a lot of people there or whether it's in a smaller group setting or discipleship group type deal, Sunday morning, whatever that is, I can make sure I have something to say that's useful and not waste their time. And I think what's happened is we've forgotten some of this, the simplicity of that. Now, it's not. You know that those things are simple, but they're not easy because it's hard to prepare a message and it's hard to care about real people and it's easier to stay really far off. But now there's all sorts of different models and strategy we can use. But I think when it comes to this next generation, whatever you want to call them, relational leadership. And I say leadership because they do look for leadership.
No, everyone does. Yeah.
I didn't say just friend, relational leadership, a leader who can actually take you somewhere while caring about you. Yeah. So that's what I think you lose when you try and just be purely authentic. It's like, man, they already have friends. They already have TikTok. They don't need another buddy.
That's the parenting problem, right? That's your kid doesn't need a friend.
Yes.
Your kid has friends.
Yes.
Your kid needs a parent.
Yes.
There's a big difference between those two things.
Right.
Now, there's a lot of detail you get in that we're not going to get into, but there's some truth to that. And the same is true of a leader at a church, right?
Yes.
Your people don't need a friend. It's okay to be friends with a couple of them, depending on your age range, right? So I'm a pastor of not a mega church. I was about to say that. I'm a pastor of a church,
right?
And so there are people in there that I am friends with.
Yes.
But what they need from me is not friendship. They need from me leadership in the spiritual sense.
Yeah, spiritual leadership, and there's a relational nature to that, and I think God's going to give us opportunity to be friends with a lot of the people we lead. But what can happen is, like, if the goal is just to be friends, that's going to run out, and there's no way to continually replicate that with every person.
Yeah.
What you can do is model relational leadership, and then the teaching side is a big one, man. Like, I think we've forgotten how much of an honor it is that people will sit there and, for 30, 40, our Tuesday nights, it's kind of a running joke. They're about 50 minutes to an hour, which is another misnomer. I mean, last Tuesday was 57 minutes,
But this was worship and teaching.
No, just teaching.
Just teaching. Okay.
Just teaching. The whole entire service was 2 hours. That is not a lie.
That's what I was trying to figure out. Like, we were talking like, it's shorter than you think or longer than you think.
Yeah, people go, and we can get all into that. I'm not saying that's good or bad. I just know for our people that's what works. Whether you're going to preach for 20 minutes or 30 minutes or 40 minutes or 50 plus minutes, it is an honor that in a world of so much noise, people would give you their attention.
That's right.
And I think it's time, especially for the next generation, we start respecting that. We don't just pull things off the cuff. We don't just have halfback. And I'm not talking, we don't need more alliterated outlines.
Sure.
I'm just talking about, like, teach them the Bible and have thought through what the cultural opposition to them are. So do the pastoral work of, okay, this is why people aren't doing this. And then do the work of, here's how they can do it. And do the work of, here's the beauty of what the text says. And I think there's a lot of respect from younger generations when they see that, And I think this is something more and more leaders are realizing about the next generation is there is a return, and I sense it, to teaching the Bible. Like, I don't know if you've noticed that as well. I'm curious, but I think for a while we thought next generation was only into music.
Sure.
And I heard some of that advice early on. It was like, man, preach as short as possible, sing as long as possible.
And see, I think what's weird to me about that is, so I was never into worship. I think in every generation it's always sort of flowed. There are people that are different. That's true of teaching as well, right? Me and my wife are very different. I like discussion-based teaching. So I want to sit with somebody, talk about a text, and then actually discuss it. That's how I learn. My wife hates that. She would much rather have you teach it to her. She'll learn it that way.
Just absorb it.
I can go.
Yeah.
And so you're always going to have those kinds of ebbs and flows in things. I do think that's a piece of authenticity, though, is as pastors, I mean, you know this. We get absorbed into this idea that we need to be like somebody else or something else.
Yes.
I think Matt Chandler made a joke one time about Mark Driscoll and was just saying, like, he was at a pastor's conference.
Yeah,
like,
I've seen this clip.
You're gonna go home and you're gonna be like, oh, he preached. You're all stupid, and and if you try to do that, you're gonna get fired because he can do that and you can't because he's him and you're not.
Yes.
And that's true. I think even if speaking length and stuff, if you're
and then he did get fired, but that's
that was a different issue, different time.
Yeah.
But the point is, like, if you're a succinct speaker, you should stay succinct. Like, you shouldn't try to pad out who is naturally a 20-minute speaker into 2 hours.
Yes.
If you're a 50-minute, an hour-long speaker, you shouldn't try to shorten that because you're never going to be able to do what you're really made to do.
Yes, 100. And again, that goes back to, like, and there's a value proposition that comes with, and you can take this too far, but
sure. As you can everything.
Yes, but younger generations really respect when you add value to their faith. It's so they'll come up and say thank you. I hate some of the depictions of, like, young adults as being super entitled and super, like,
which again serve more millennial than it is Gen Z. But
yeah, I've got thoughts about millennial, but we'll keep that off the. Yeah, I do think there is.
Millennial.
Yeah,
I'm still basically part of the one before that.
And I've got tons of millennial friends, but even some of them agree there is something to the millennial generation that
we messed a lot of stuff up. I'm not gonna.
Yeah, and Gen Z is far from perfect.
Oh, sure.
And I think you see the craziness in culture. They probably pendulum swing They're not apathetic, and I
Yeah.
think sometimes millennials could be viewed as being apathetic. I think with Gen Z is they're very passionate.
Yeah.
So we see them be passionately really wrong and destructive about things.
Right, yeah.
But the fun part is if you get them, if not us, if the Spirit of God and the Word of God and the people of God can convict them to live committed to Jesus, they are all in, and you will find that they are some of your most committed. There's a saying I heard, and I just it grounds a lot of what kind of runs through my veins when it comes to ministry. I think a guy named Grant Skeldon, who does a lot of stuff with Think Media and just younger generation stuff, building younger leaders. He goes, Gen Z isn't leaving the church because they're asked to do too much. They're leaving because they're asked to do too little.
Yeah, we keep saying, I said this when we were in youth, the biggest annoyance I ever had, and so many of our older generations say this, and they don't mean what they say by it, but it's just how they're phrasing it, and it's how it's coming across is, man, you guys are so great. I can't wait because you're the church of tomorrow.
Right.
And no, they're the church of right now. If you
Yes.
keep treating them like the church of tomorrow, they're not going to be here when tomorrow comes.
Yes.
That they want to be. I like the way you phrase that, which is passionate. I think that's probably very true of Gen Z. That they're passionate, and they can be passionately very wrong and very bad.
Yes.
And they can be passionately very on fire and very good. But whatever it is, they're going to be on the extreme.
Well, and they're going to find things to they want to contribute to society.
That's right.
So here's the thing. If we're not going to, in our churches, be willing to give them real opportunities. I'm so blessed. I'm 25 years old, okay? Yeah. So I am a living product of, shout out to Dr. Ted Trailer and Pastor Sean Paulet and guys like John Huff, who is one of the other pastors as well. Like, they modeled, like, giving ownership to young leaders such as myself. Yeah. So it's kind of, like, baked into who I am because it's like, look, like, this was done for me. Yeah. But these younger leaders, and this isn't just about pastors, this is just like the saints in general, like they're going to go use their giftedness and talent and things somewhere. They're going to pull out an iPhone and they're going to start an online business, and they're going to get more views on their Instagram than our sermons do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So how about let's tap into that for the sake of the kingdom of God instead of almost putting them in a timeout. Now, there is something to be said about youth and learning to respect authority and pay your dues, and that's something I think Gen Z needs to. I'm someone who's trying to like balance both, where I'm like, let's respect tradition, like let's not run away from it, but also.
But I don't think that's a Gen Z problem; it's just a youth problem.
Yeah,
like, all of us when we were that age, we're like, we could do this better.
Exactly.
Get in there like that's a natural progression. I joked about it with my dad before, right? When I was 18, he was an idiot. Now that I'm 35, he's the most brilliant man I've ever met.
Oh yeah, and I'm already like I'm in that. I'm seeing already.
You start to gain that knowledge of like, okay, he was right about a lot of things, or they were right about a lot of things, and I needed to back.
Or you at least understand where they're coming from.
Yeah. Which is a big. So this is you're probably too young to remember Adventures in Odyssey. I don't know.
Oh no, I grew up a little bit on that. Okay. That and Patch the Pirate. So
I didn't do Patch the Pirate as much. I understand where you're going. This is a homeschool, private school thing that we're talking about now. But I have still all the old Adventures in Odyssey. There's a great one that I loved, not theology behind it, but the respect level behind it, which was, I think it was Mr. Whitaker, whoever was talking, and made the point that it's really incumbent on the old to understand the young. And it really matters because old people, that's a bad way of saying it, but older generations, you can remember what it was like to not be listened to, and what it was like to not be heard, and what it was like to feel
left out. Good, yeah.
But a younger generation doesn't understand what it feels like to know you're right and to try to communicate that downwards to somebody who's against you. And they can't know that because they are not there until they're there. But you've been where they're at, and you can understand that. And that's why that sort of is sort of incumbent on that generation.
Wow. That's another great word right there. I'm gonna generational empathy.
Yes, and
that's a good.
It has to come from the top. It can't come from the bottom.
Well, and that's something like I think, it's always gonna be a challenge when you're reaching younger generations. Is like a weakness of Gen Z is like they don't respect top-down leadership implicitly like previous generations did.
Which they should. In some
Which
ways.
They should.
Yeah,
yes. Yeah. They don't always respect norms and traditions the same way, but they are talented and gifted and passionate and really want to make a contribution to the world. So part of discipling them up is going to be like, hey, teaching them the good that came from tradition, and teaching them, hey, like, all establishments aren't bad and evil just because they're established. In fact, someone your age sweat and toiled and bled, very similar to you. Right. You're a 23-year-old who's passionate. Man, the creator of this establishment that you don't believe in was a 23-year-old person with, staying in an apartment, but then it is also like listening to them and hearing their voice, so those are the two things that you kind of wrestle with, is like, we want to encourage them in their passion, myself included, kind of speaking from the group, the people group. I'm still solidly in it. But then I do, again, speaking for the people group, I do think teaching a respect, even thinking about Crossroads when I say, like, man, I stand on the shoulders and the prayers of those who came before me, because quickly we can make it all about, man, nothing like this has ever happened before, and at all of with Crossroads, which might be true, but it probably couldn't have happened if it wasn't for all the things that happened before. And there's a healthy respect.
Very rarely did it start right here.
Yeah, it's like the classic, like, overnight star. It's like, there's no overnight stars. It's 10 years of this, and so having a like, hey, college students, the reason why we have this building just for you is because those people right now that you think are outdated, they worked a job, they stayed married, and they gave and prayed and loved and raised families and messed up and had bad ideas, but they had a lot of good ideas, same that we do. And I think kind of creating a unity among generations is also a big key to this.
Oh, absolutely. And more, that's sort of the idea. We have to get back to, we're all in this together.
Yes.
We have to, like, deal with this. There are going to be good ideas that come from Gen Z. There's a political world to that. That's conservative versus liberal. We don't need to get into all that, but part of that is the old quest of the fence, right? That's what tradition is. Yeah. So you come across a fence, and a liberal, or let's just say younger person, is going to look at that and go, well, there's no reason for this fence to be here. Let's tear it out.
Yes.
And a more conservative and older person is going to look at it and go, well, hold on a second. There might be a reason this fence is here. We should figure that out first. And it may be that the fence is no longer needed. It was there for a purpose, but now that purpose is over. We can tear it out.
Yeah, that's
great. But it may be that there are still cows in this other field that need to be kept there.
Yes.
That it's here for a reason. You just don't know what the reason is.
It's the third really great thing I'm stealing from you today.
Man, it was good talking with you.
Yeah, absolutely phenomenal.
I know you got to run.
Yeah.
Coffee, but
appreciate you, brother. Yeah,
absolutely.
Honored.